Randy Meisner spent most of his life being quiet while the loudest voices around him wrote the history. He was there at the beginning when the harmonies first locked in, when the band still believed everyone mattered equally. But as success grew, his presence slowly faded from the story the world was told. Near the end of his life, when the noise finally died down, Randy Meisner chose to speak, not to attack, not to settle scores, but to tell the truth he had carried for decades. The man who helped build it all. Before the Eagles became one of the most powerful names in American music, Randy Meisner was already a working musician with something rare: discipline, restraint, and an instinct for harmony. Born in Scotts Bluff, Nebraska, he was never drawn to the spotlight. He learned music the way many Midwestern musicians did, quietly, steadily, without thinking about fame. By the time he arrived in Los Angeles, he had already played in bands, worked sessions, and learned how to support a song instead of dominating it. Randy's early career shaped the role he would later play in the Eagles. With Poco and Rick Nelson's Stone Canyon Band, he absorbed a blend of country, folk, and rock that emphasized balance rather than flash. He understood how voices could weave together, how bass lines could hold a song upright without demanding attention. This was not the mindset of a frontman. It was the mindset of someone who believed the whole mattered more than the individual. Everything changed when producer John Boylan brought Randy together with Glenn Frey and Don Henley. At the time, Frey and Henley were touring as backing musicians for Linda Ronstadt, still unknown to the wider public but already forming a strong creative partnership. Bernie Leadon soon joined them, completing a group that at first truly believed in equality. They rehearsed constantly, sang together without thinking about money, and discovered that their voices locked in naturally. Randy later said that when they first sang together, something simply clicked, not planned, not forced, just right. When they signed with David Geffen's new label, Asylum Records, the band didn't yet understand what they were becoming. Their debut album succeeded beyond expectations, selling over 1 million copies and turning 4 working musicians into stars almost overnight. Randy was everywhere on that record. He sang lead on multiple tracks, co-wrote several songs, and helped define the harmonic identity that would become the Eagles' signature. Take the Devil, one of his compositions, was the song that revealed the band's sound during early rehearsals, when all 4 sang together with acoustic guitars. At that moment, Randy Meisner was not a background figure. He was central. He was equal. And for a brief time, the Eagles truly were a band built on shared voices and shared credit, when equality quietly disappeared. The first cracks didn't come with shouting or dramatic ultimatums. They arrived quietly, buried inside songwriting credits and creative decisions. After the success of the debut album, the Eagles moved quickly into their second record. That was when the balance began to shift. Glenn Frey and Don Henley had started writing more together, forming a tight partnership that naturally gave them more influence. Their songs began to dominate the track lists, and their voices became more central to the band's identity. On the second album, Randy Meisner's presence was noticeably reduced. Where he had once shared equal space, he now found himself contributing less. Fewer songs, fewer lead vocals, fewer moments where his voice stood at the center. It wasn't a dramatic demotion, but it was unmistakable. Decisions were being made faster, and not everyone was being consulted. The idea that the Eagles were a democracy was quietly being replaced by a hierarchy. Randy felt it, even if he didn't yet know how to articulate it. He was not a confrontational person by nature. He didn't argue loudly or fight for control. Instead, he internalized frustration. He later admitted that he wanted his opinions to matter more, wanted to sing more, but didn't know how to criticize the direction the band was taking without creating conflict. In a group where confidence increasingly equaled power, silence became a disadvantage. As the Eagles continued forward, success only accelerated the divide. Albums sold well, tours grew larger, and expectations climbed. With each release, Frey and Henley became more firmly established as the leaders, the ones steering the sound, approving material, shaping the band's future. Bernie Leadon, who had been deeply committed to the band's original country rock roots, grew increasingly unhappy with the shift toward a harder, more mainstream rock sound. Randy stood somewhere in between, loyal to the group, but uneasy with how quickly his role was shrinking. By the time the band recorded their third album, Randy was clearly no longer an equal partner. His contributions were minimal compared to the dominant songwriting duo. He began to feel surplus, present, but no longer essential. Lyrics he sang took on a different weight, especially songs that hinted at uncertainty and emotional distance. Whether intentional or not, his performances carried the tone of someone questioning where he still belonged. Then came a strange contradiction. On the next album, Randy delivered one of the band's most iconic moments, a soaring ballad built entirely around his voice. Take It to the Limit became a massive hit, climbing the charts and cementing his place in Eagles history. Yet even this success didn't restore balance. The song was co-written, not his alone, and its popularity placed a new burden on him rather than giving him power. As the band grew larger, Randy Meisner felt smaller. He was still there, still contributing, still touring, but the Eagles he had helped build no longer felt like a place where his voice shaped the future. And the pressure was only beginning. The song that became a burden. Take It to the Limit should have been Randy Meisner's triumph. Instead, it slowly became his breaking point. The song's success locked him into a role he never asked for. The man expected to hit impossible high notes night after night, no matter how exhausted or unwell he felt. As tours grew longer and venues larger, the pressure became relentless. Unlike Glenn Frey and Don Henley, who seemed to thrive under attention, Randy was deeply uncomfortable with constant exposure. By the time the band reached full superstardom, the touring schedule was brutal. Months on the road turned into nearly non-stop cycles of buses, hotels, rehearsals, and performances. Randy's health began to suffer. He grew anxious about live performances, worried about whether his voice would hold up. He later admitted that fear crept in every night, not fear of the audience, but fear of failing in front of his own band. At the same time, his personal life was unraveling. Extended time away from home strained his marriage, and the guilt of being absent weighed heavily on him. While the Eagles were becoming one of the most profitable acts in America, Randy felt emotionally depleted. Success did not bring security. It brought isolation. Inside the band, patience was thinning. The environment was no longer forgiving of weakness or hesitation. Expectations were absolute. When Randy expressed fatigue, it was increasingly interpreted as resistance. The gap between who he was and what the band demanded widened with every show. What made it worse was that Randy did not know how to fight back. He did not argue for rest. He did not demand accommodation. He absorbed the stress quietly, hoping things would stabilize. But the machine surrounding the Eagles did not slow down for anyone. By the time the Hotel California tour began, Randy Meisner was already running on empty. And the moment that would end, everything was closer than anyone realized. The night everything broke. By the summer of the Hotel California tour, the Eagles were exhausted beyond repair. They had been on the road for close to a year, performing night after night under enormous pressure. For Randy Meisner, the toll was severe. He was physically unwell, emotionally drained, and struggling with fear, not of the audience, but of failing to meet expectations that no longer felt human. The song at the center of it all was still Take It to the Limit, the very track that had helped define his place in the band. The incident happened backstage at a concert in Knoxville. The main set was over. The band had already played encores. Randy was sick, worn down, and at the edge of collapse. When the idea of returning to the stage came up again, he refused. Accounts differ on the exact words, but what followed was unmistakable. A confrontation between Randy and Glenn Frey that turned personal, aggressive, and humiliating. Frey later claimed he was encouraging Randy to go back out, insisting it would be fine. Randy's version was different. He said Frey got in his face, pushed him, and insulted him, calling him weak, calling him a pussy. In that moment, after months of silence and endurance, Randy snapped. He swung at Frey. Security and police backstage had to intervene to break it up. What mattered most was not the punch. It was what came after. From that night on, Randy was isolated. He described the remaining days of the tour as pure hell. No one spoke to him. No one socialized with him. He felt like hired help, not a founding member. The band closed ranks without him inside. In September, Randy Meisner quit. Publicly, it was described as exhaustion. Privately, he knew something had been broken beyond repair. He had helped build the Eagles, but he was leaving alone, without ceremony, without reconciliation, and without the illusion that equality had ever truly survived success. Silence was not peace. After leaving the Eagles, Randy Meisner did something almost unheard of in rock music. He did not attack. He did not write a tell-all book. He did not tour the media circuit blaming former bandmates. He simply disappeared. For a man who had helped build one of the most profitable bands in American history, his absence was striking. While the Eagles grew larger, richer, and more mythologized, Randy faded quietly into the background. At first, the silence was intentional. Randy said more than once that he wanted the fighting to be over, at least for himself. He was exhausted by conflict and did not want to reopen wounds. But silence did not protect him from being erased. As the years passed, the public narrative of the Eagles increasingly revolved around Glenn Frey and Don Henley. Randy's name was mentioned less, his role simplified, his departure reduced to a footnote. That erasure became painfully clear when the Eagles reunited for their massively successful Hell Freezes Over tour. Randy was not invited. He later admitted how deeply that exclusion hurt. He had helped create the band's sound, played on their most important albums, and yet the reunion moved forward as if he had never existed. He reached out. He asked. The answer was no. Once again, the door was closed. In later interviews, Randy's tone shifted. He was still careful, still restrained, but the hurt was unmistakable. He said he felt they acted as if he had never played with them at all. The idea that loyalty would eventually be rewarded proved false. Success, it seemed, had rewritten history. Health problems compounded everything. Randy struggled with alcoholism, depression, and bipolar disorder. His life after the Eagles was marked not by triumph, but by survival. When tragedy struck at home, and when his personal world collapsed, there was no band to return to, no safety net of old friendships. Fame had moved on without him. And yet, even then, Randy did not lash out. Years later, he described leaving the Eagles with a phrase that captured everything he had learned. Leaving the band, he said, was like leaving the mob. Once you're gone, there is no coming back. No reunion, no forgiveness, just distance. What Randy finally said before the end. Near the end of his life, Randy Meisner began to speak, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. After decades of silence, he gave a handful of interviews where the truth emerged in fragments, calm but devastating. He did not rewrite history. He did not deny his own mistakes. But he finally explained why he had walked away and why he never tried to fight his way back in. Randy said he could have stayed with the Eagles. He knew what it would have meant financially. He understood the scale of the success that was still coming, but the cost had become unbearable. Touring had drained him physically and mentally. The pressure to perform, take it to the limit every night, had become a source of fear instead of pride. And the internal environment of the band had left him feeling invisible. When he reached the point where the choice was sanity or money, he chose sanity. That decision shaped the rest of his life. It did not lead to peace right away. His years after the Eagles were difficult, marked by illness, addiction, and personal tragedy. But even in those struggles, Randy remained consistent in one thing. He did not turn bitter. He spoke about the Eagles as people he had worked with, not enemies. He acknowledged the good times. He accepted that the band moved on without him. What hurt most, he admitted, was not leaving. It was being erased, being treated as if his contribution no longer mattered, being excluded from reunions, watching history narrow until only 2 names seemed to carry the weight of what 4 people had built together. Still, he resisted the urge to lash out. He believed that revisiting old fights would not heal anything. When Randy Meisner died in Los Angeles at the age of 77, the Eagles released a brief statement. They praised his vocal range. They called him integral to their early success. The words were respectful, but they came late. By then, Randy had already made peace with what his story was. Not the loudest, not the richest, but honest. In the end, Randy Meisner's silence was not weakness. It was a choice, a quiet refusal to trade dignity for noise. He helped create something massive, then walked away when it demanded too much of him. And only at the very end did he say what mattered most. He left because he had to survive. So what do you think mattered more in the end? Staying and becoming richer, or leaving to protect his sanity? Was Randy Meisner overlooked, or was his quiet exit the bravest choice he could make? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this story meaningful, like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories behind the music.